April 26, 1986, 1:23 and 58 seconds in the morning. In the darkness above Ukraine, the sky suddenly turns white. Reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant is gone, blown apart by a massive explosion. The fuse for this disaster was lit years before anyone in that control room even started their shift. To understand the explosion, you have to look at the world that built the plant. The Soviet Union of the 1970s and 80s was a superpower aggressively competing with the West. Nuclear energy was a powerful symbol of state supremacy. Engineers were expected to produce fast results, and officials were expected to report total success. Look at this architectural cross-section of the Soviet RBMK-1000 reactor. Planners loved this design because it was cheap to build. To save massive amounts of money and construction time, they entirely omitted a crucial feature: the heavy outer concrete containment dome that you would typically see enclosing the core in other countries. Questioning the party's targets or raising safety concerns carried severe personal risks, including the loss of your career or your freedom. Systemic pressure to meet industrial quotas meant that quietly cutting corners was consistently rewarded. The state prioritized the appearance of perfection over physical reality. This simplified schematic of the reactor core shows a severe mechanical defect. Under certain conditions, specifically at low power, the RBMK became highly unstable. If the reactor overheated and the cooling water boiled into steam bubbles, called voids, the nuclear reaction speeds up. More heat makes more steam, which creates even more power. Nuclear engineers call this a positive void coefficient. If we expand this diagram to compare it against a Western reactor core, the difference is stark. Other nations deliberately design their plants to avoid this runaway loop, ensuring that an increase in steam would naturally dampen the power. Soviet planners embrace a dangerous design to keep operating costs low. This extreme vulnerability was classified as a state secret. The engineers and operators running the Chernobyl plant day and night were not widely informed about the physics governing their own machines. By hiding this flaw, the state turned a cost-saving engineering choice into a hidden time bomb. All it required was the right set of conditions and an unaware crew to trigger a catastrophe. Those conditions arrived on April 25, 1986. Reactor number 4 was scheduled for a routine safety test. The regional electricity grid requested a 9-hour delay to cover local power demands. By the time the test was finally cleared to begin, well past midnight, the experienced day shift was long gone. The night shift, far less familiar with the complex procedure, was now in charge. This diagram shows what happened next in the core. As the operators prepared for the test, a natural nuclear byproduct called xenon gas built up inside the reactor. This purple gas absorbs neutrons and suppresses the chain reaction. Because of this xenon poisoning, the reactor's power output dropped dangerously low, far below the required levels for the test. To compensate for the choking effect of the xenon and force the reaction back up, the operators withdrew nearly all the control rods out of the core. These rods act as the brakes for the nuclear reaction. Removing them left the fuel fully exposed and in a critically degraded state. To guarantee the test wouldn't be interrupted by automatic safety protocols, the operators actively switched off the plant's emergency core cooling systems earlier that day. Stopping the test and reporting another failure to their superiors carried harsh professional penalties. Driven by the fear of falling short, the operators systematically stripped away every mechanical safety net, leaving a highly volatile reactor entirely unprotected. At 1:23 and 04 seconds in the morning, the test officially begins. The operators disconnect the turbine from the reactor's steam supply. As the turbine spins down, the flow of cooling water into the reactor drops. Without enough water to absorb the heat, steam bubbles rapidly multiply. The reactor's fatal design flaw, the positive void coefficient, is triggered. Inside the core, the power begins to rapidly, violently surge. At 1:23 and 40 seconds, an operator realizes the danger and presses the emergency shutdown button, known as AZ5. This is the kill switch. It is supposed to drop all the control rods back into the core simultaneously and halt the reaction instantly. Look closely at this diagram of the descending control rod. To save money, the tips of these rods were made of graphite. Graphite is a material that briefly accelerates the reaction before the rest of the rod can slow it down. When these graphite tips enter the core, They cause a sudden, localized flash of extreme energy. The power in reactor number 4 spikes to roughly 300 times its normal operating limit. The nuclear fuel ruptures. The superheated steam builds pressure so fast it blows the 1,000-ton roof straight up into the night sky, triggering 2 massive explosions. The exact mechanism designed to save the reactor was the very trigger that destroyed it. Within minutes, local fire crews and first responders arrived at the open burning core. They were told it was an ordinary roof fire. Working without heavy radiation gear or respirators, many inhaled radioactive particles directly. Some reported tasting metal on their tongues, a clear physical symptom of intense radiation exposure. To maintain the illusion that the situation was entirely under control, Soviet officials waited 36 hours before evacuating the city of Pripyat. For a day and a half, 49,000 residents living just 2 kilometers from a burning nuclear reactor went about their lives, breathing in the fallout. Moscow remained silent to the outside world. The Soviet government only admitted an accident had occurred after radioactive particles carried on the wind set off alarms at the Forsmark Nuclear Power Plant in Sweden, over 1,000 kilometers away. The cultural reflex to deny reality and contain information delayed critical emergency responses. The insistence on secrecy turned a localized catastrophe into a global health crisis. Extinguishing the fires and containing the ruins required a grueling, years-long cleanup effort by an estimated 600,000 workers, known as liquidators. Today, the remains of reactor number 4 are entombed inside the new safe confinement, a massive arch of steel designed to contain the ongoing radiation. Ultimately, hundreds of thousands of people permanently lost their homes, their land, and their history. The evacuated populations continue to report high rates of anxiety, depression, and a pervasive sense of helplessness. The disaster cost the Soviet economy the equivalent of tens of billions of dollars, at a time when it was already buckling. Mikhail Gorbachev later wrote that the Chernobyl explosion was perhaps the real cause of the collapse of the Soviet Union. The system irradiated its own citizens without their consent and lied to the world to protect its image. A government that prioritizes the appearance of safety over actual safety and punishes those who raise concerns carries within it the seeds of its own destruction.